Hey, this is Stefan from Only Comic Books. Been a fan of the Comics Alternative for a while now, and appreciate the stellar quality. Hopefully my Patreon support can contribute to a new trade.
This is the Comics Alternative, on location and talking with creators at Small Press Expo 2015, Part 2. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And this is the second of our 3 on-location interview episodes that basically spring from last weekend's Small Press Expo. Andy and I were both there, and we talked to a variety of creators, and we wanted to share those conversations with you, our dear listener. But before we get to those, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off cover price, and every single month you're going to find some incredible and unbelievable specials. Sometimes you can find books at 45% off cover price, sometimes comics at 50% off of their cover prices, but often you're going to find discounts that are much more impressive than that.
And you can save even more money by buying your comics in bundles rather than individual issues, and you will find bundle madness going on at DCB Service. You can find Marvel bundles, DC bundles, Valiant, Vertigo. You just have to go to the site to see all of the bundle madness going on.
It's madness. It's madness, I tell ya!
Yes, madness!
Yes, so if you want to take part in this madness, then you have to go to the website dcbservice.com. We do, and we're pretty sane, I think. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs, and after you do get your comics there, be sure to drop those guys a line and tell them that Andy and Derek, the two guys with PhDs, sent you.
Well, maybe, Derek, our sanity is in question from time to time, but not during these interviews at SPX.
That's right. Yeah, we did a lot of interviews, and for those who listened to yesterday's on-location interview show, you heard quite a number of conversations with a variety of creators. We have even more for you today. And so here are the people that we interview in this episode. Dakota Macfadzean and Andy Warner, Jonathan Baylis, Amelia Onorato, Sam Spina, Keith Knight, Gregory Benton, and Dean Haspiel.
Yeah, that's a pretty good lineup there.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and hear what that lineup is all about.
Let's do that.
I'm at the Irene table. I don't know if you would call this the Irene table, but I'll call it the Irene table. And I'm here with two of the creative minds behind Irene, Andy Warner and Dakota Macfadzean. Guys, how you doing today?
Good, yeah.
And you said that at the same time, so it's like in stereo.
Well, we used to be housemates, so we're sort of still in sync.
It's true. We lived together for a year, yeah.
Now, we've talked about Irene on the podcast a few times, specifically that episode from about, I guess it was not quite a year ago, Dakota, when we did the interview with you. And so we talked quite a bit about Irene. But for those of our listeners who haven't taken the hint yet and have sought out Irene as they well should, describe it to those who are unfamiliar with the title.
You want to take a point?
Sure. So Irene is a comics and art anthology that is co-edited by myself, Andy Warner, who's here, and DW, who is not here, unfortunately.
He's back in San Francisco.
Yeah, and we basically just take our overlapping interests in comics we like, and we try to put them together into an anthology that has a lot of variety.
Yeah, there's never any themes, but it sort of exists in like the Venn diagram between awesome art, great comics, and complete nightmares.
Yeah.
But this new issue that we're actually debuting at the show, issue 6, has a cartoonist from every single continent in the world, including Antarctica, which I think might be the first time that's happened in comic history, but I'm not sure. Yeah, to our knowledge. I feel comfortable saying that.
Yeah, you don't hear about Antarctican cartoonists very often.
It's true.
Yeah.
Now, and one of the things we talked about, Dakota, is the fact that you don't see near as many anthologies as you used to, comics anthologies. What are some of the challenges in pulling this together, or maybe even in getting it off the ground a number of years ago when you started Irene?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's an anthology is sort of a group work. So especially with something like Irene, where we explicitly sort of don't have themes, and we've never done like Kickstarters or anything like that, it can be sometimes hard to get the word out. But they sort of speak for themselves. Like once people like pick them up and look at them, they're packed with like amazing, fantastically good art. So
yeah. And we actually started Irene when we started talking about it when we were still at the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont. And the initial conversation was, we need a way to keep ourselves accountable to one another and keep producing work. Which is funny in retrospect because we've all been so busy since we graduated that, Irene feels like just one more thing that we also have to do, and it feels very panicked sometimes, but we also love it.
Yeah, it often is all created in like one mad rush like in the space of a month, like 2 weeks before we need to send it to the printers.
Yeah, thankfully we have great contributors, so that
our
helps a lot.
contributors
It makes
are
our
the
job
best.
easy.
And they're amazing.
Yeah.
Or, are you finding it more and more of a challenge to kind of balance Irene along with all of the other work that you guys do individually?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a full-time life as a cartoonist, and Dakota does too, and Dave works and does a ton of comics too.
We're all getting into our 30s now, so we have all these adult responsibilities in addition to, making comics and cartoons and stuff, and it gets a little bit more challenging to find a balance with that, but
having 3 people helps.
Yeah, it helps share the load for sure.
Yeah.
So I was wondering about the triumvirate of the editorship, if that, you said it helps. I was wondering if it may potentially hinder the process, because there's no one person calling the shots, but you do have 3 people who can share the workload.
We function pretty well together. Some of the most fun parts are the ones where all 3 editors are sort of figuring out like who to invite for the next issue, or figuring out what order. We put a lot of thought and energy into the order of the stories, and even though we don't have themes, we try to like secretly hide themes and narratives in it by the way that we actually lay out the stories. And so, I don't know, getting together for a Skype session of that is always...
Yeah. And between the 3 of us, we have a lot of respect and admiration for one another, and we don't bring a lot of ego to the table, I feel. So when we have these discussions, if 2 out of 3 people feel one way, then the third person is okay with that too. And I don't know, it's been surprisingly easy on that end so far.
Yeah, and it definitely helps to, again, the contributors, like we're careful about who we ask to work with, because, you want to work with not only good and talented people, but also like people that aren't going to blow up at the last minute or, vanish for 3 months.
Right,
and, being careful, especially in a book, like the new book is 216 pages. So there's, how many contributors even are there?
I lost count.
Yeah, there's a lot. So, like, dealing with artists is sort of famously like herding cats, but we pick really good people, and they're responsible, and that's sort of the strength of it is the people that are actually in it.
Yeah, aside from the workload of actually designing and putting together the issue and everything, we've had very few hiccups where, there's last-minute stresses or anything. Like, everything's been pretty minor.
Yeah. And we've been doing this for like 3 years now, so it's sort of... I could put together an anthology in my sleep.
And often have.
Well, one question I have is, you were talking about agreeing on contributors, and that, the 3 of you are of a similar mindset. How do you initially discover the contributors? Are they people you already know, people who come to you and submit work, all of the above?
Well, we don't really have an open submission policy. We basically just approach friends and or artists who we admire and see if they'd be interested in contributing a few pages.
Yeah, we try and have sort of as broad a like palette of contributors that we're drawing from too. And that was actually sort of how the 7 continents thing like happened. Is we realized that we accidentally had 5 continents, and then we just went for the last 2.
The idea just occurred to you.
Yeah, exactly. And so like Irene has always had a very international sort of mandate to it, and we try and get very diverse cartoonists, and it's just you sort of like figure out like who's good and who would fit well together, and I don't know how to make a good book.
We work with a lot of spreadsheets. We sort of make master lists of potential contributors, and then we whittle that down based on our votes. And I don't know, it's all quite democratic between the 3 of us.
Yeah, it's a democratic 3-part dictatorship.
So this latest issue, which is number 6, is just coming out. Do they come out? It's not quite annually, because issue 5, it hasn't been that long since issue 5, right?
It used to be twice a year. Now it's been a year since the last one.
Yeah. Since we've been doing bigger issues, we decided to pare it back to just coming out once a year.
Okay. So they are getting progressively bigger and thicker.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It started out, the first Irene was like a stapled zine, and now this is like a giant, square-bound 216-page book.
Yeah, I'm looking at this right now, and the spine is significantly thicker than what we have with 5 and 4.
Absolutely. For the first time, we could put the name on the spine.
Yeah, that's new.
Yeah. Now, Dakota, I have to ask you, because you're nominated for an Ignatz Award for Don't Get Eaten by Anything, a collection of the dailies. And, that was one of the books that we looked at when we did our conundrum focus earlier this year. When did you find out that you were one of the nominees?
About a month ago, I guess. I was actually in LA for work and got the email on my way to the airport. So I actually wasn't even planning on coming to SPX because I had another commitment, and thankfully was able to get around that, and I'm here, and it's great.
Because I've always wondered of certain awards, how are the nominees contacted? Is it a phone call? Is it a telegram? Is it an email? But you got an email.
Yeah, it's been an email. Any time I've been involved with any kind of award, it's been an email. Yeah, which is bad because I'm getting progressively worse at email and just sort of constantly falling behind. So,
are people constantly asking you now about the Ignatz?
Not really. Not significantly more than they typically are asking about my comics. It's a funny thing. I was worried I didn't bring enough books, and now it seems like I'll have just the right amount. So, there you go.
Well, in terms of both of your work, do you find that Irene has been a good platform for your individual projects, both the dailies and then other comic projects that you have going on?
Actually, for me, Irene is almost a sort of way to do things that are out of my usual wheelhouse. Like the stuff I get paid to do, I work in comics full time, but I do mainly sort of nonfiction stuff for online sites like KQED or Slate or Medium and things like that. And Irene sort of gives me a chance to do fiction or memoir stuff that maybe is a little hard to sell to an editor.
Yeah. For me, I mean that's the thing about Irene is the 3 editors always contribute something to the issue as well, so there's that element to it. And it's been kind of a nice way if I have a story that I'm not really sure about and don't really have a place for, because Irene is sort of, has such a wide range of artistic styles and storytelling, it's a great place to try something out and just see if it works. So there's an element of experimentation for it for me.
More than your own.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
So if our listeners, if they haven't gotten the hint already, as well they should after listening to this interview with you guys, and they want to get issues of Irene themselves, because I know they can get back issues up to a point, where can they go to find Irene?
Yeah, we're all over the internet. We're on irenecomics.bigcartel.com for our store.
And irenecomics.tumblr.com is our sort of main site. We're sold out of the first 3 issues, but those were short issues anyway, and these new ones are better.
Yeah, agreed. And yeah, just search for Irene Comics, and we're on the internet. We're there.
Yeah, we're named after a hurricane.
Yeah.
And not many comics anthologies can say that. Well, guys, Andy and Dakota, thank you very much for being on the podcast. Again.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Derek. Yeah, appreciate it.
I'm at the table of Jonathan Baylis, who is the creator of Sew Buttons, and this is rather significant because Sew Buttons was not only one of the first comics that we discussed on the Comics Alternative, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was the first, if we want to call it mini comic or self-published comic that we discussed. So, how are you? It's finally nice to meet you in person, Jonathan.
Nice to see you in person. So let's see. Since I think I had only had a couple of issues out when you discussed my books, the last time, but now I've been publishing one book a year, almost every year, to the point where I had 7 books, and I was like, you know what? I need to come up with a collection. So I collected the best of 7 issues of So Buttons. Did it? Also added some new material. And I have my very first trade paperback collection. It's like almost 200 pages. It's got French flaps. It's beautifully printed. And it's called So Buttons, Man of Like a Dozen Faces.
Okay, so you said it has not only those first, 7 issues?
7 issues. Also has
additional material.
Additional new material, right. So I have... So the title of the book itself, Man of Like a Dozen Faces, comes from... in my house growing up, we had these lobby cards for a Jimmy Cagney movie called Man of 1,000 Faces, which was about Lon Chaney, who of course was, this guy who did his own makeup, and he was the Phantom of the Opera and Hunchback of Notre Dame and all that stuff. It's my mom's favorite movie. And as a kid, maybe I was influenced by that movie or seeing those lobby cards all around, but I wanted to become a monster movie makeup artist, and I went to NYU originally to do just that. And so I have a comic story that is about that in there, and it's a sort of a comics jam a little bit between Rick Parker, who's a long-time Marvel Comics guy, and he's done a lot of stuff for Paper Cuts over the years, and also with Noah Van Sciver, who's done a ton of indie stuff.
He's all over the place.
All over the place, and got some big stuff with Fantagraphics in the recent year or two. So that's one story. And then I'm also tabling here at SPX with my friend Rachel Dukes, and she has a comic called Frankie Comics, and she, which is about her cat, her relationship with her cat. And I thought, maybe I would like you to do a comic for me about my dog. And it was actually the longest story I've ever written. Everything I've written so far is very short. It could be a 2-pager, a 4-pager, 8-pager, but this is a 12-page comic. And Rachel drew it about the situations that led to getting my dog, which I would like to say is the love of the other love of my life.
You have to say that.
The other love of my life. But I'm about to have a new additional love of my life because Ophira is going to have a baby in 6 weeks.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I hope it's mine. Yeah. But SPX. It's it's been a fun show. I actually, because she did that dog story, I decided to also collect my dog stories into a little mini comic, calling it So Mocha. So I've got the trade paperback, the So Mocha book. Those are the new things I have here. It's been a fun show. I mean, the energy of SPX is always amazing, and I almost consider, even though I'm from New York, I live in Brooklyn, I always consider SPX my home show, but because I've been coming here for like 7-8 years, something like that.
I was going to ask how long you've been coming to SPX.
Yeah, it's definitely been about 7-8 years. I think like 8 years visiting, but then I immediately started exhibiting the next year. So I think this is year 7. I've been driving down from Brooklyn to Bethesda to sell some mini comics. And now my new collection.
Wow. So where can our listeners find copies of the new book, as well as maybe back issues if they want to look at the original?
Sure. I would say there are 3 places to find my comics. Maybe a very easy way is to just go to my website, which is sobuttons.com. That's sobuttons.com, and you can get all my back issues, like 7 back issues, a holiday special, the dog special, but also like a signed edition of the trade paperback, Man of Like a Dozen Faces. But if you go to Amazon.com, since it's like a real book with an ISBN, Amazon is selling hard copies. So if you have like one of those Prime memberships or whatever, you're gonna have them send you a copy. But also, I've teamed up with Comixology. Comixology is a digital app, and they've been very good about, they sponsor the Ignatz Awards here at SPX, and a couple of years ago, they started this thing called Submit, which is for, indie people like me. They could sell their comics digitally through Comixology, and they have all my books on there, and those guys have been great. So if you want a digital copy and not have to deal with all the paper things, you can go to Comixology.
How long have you been distributing the So Buttons digitally through Comixology?
I think it's now it's 2 or 3 years. I think they started that submit thing. I think it's 2 years ago, like 2 SPXs ago. They started with that app and with that submit portion of their site, and so like they did a rollout of my books because I sent all of them. And I did like one every couple of months or something like that. But now they're all caught up. But I think 2 years I've been working with Comixology.
So are you going to continue with individual issues of So Buttons, or now that you've come out with if we want to call it a graphic novel or a collection, you've gotten that little itch that you want to do longer projects?
Well, it's funny. I still like doing short stories, and I like collaborating with a lot of different people. Even in my day job, I collaborate with a lot of people. I produce promos for USA Network, and so I'm working all the time with different writers, editors, voiceover people. So I just like collaborating with all kinds of different people. So I do like the idea of continuing on with the short stories, and Noah Van Sciver already drew a cover for like a mini comic that's like based on a Harvey Pekar, Robert Crumb piece. So I'm going to continue to do that. However, now that I have created this longer form book, I do have like maybe a 5-year plan of 100, 200 page graphic novel, one story, one artist. We'll see if I can get there.
So doing this longer book, this collection, has given you kind of a new direction.
Is it a new direction, or is it more just sort of the natural evolution or path of a mini comics person? You do these mini comics for a while, and I think that eventually you just graduate to doing bigger things, longer things.
Yes. Well, listen, good luck in your endeavor, and also good luck with So Buttons, Man of Like a Dozen Faces.
That's it. Thank you very much. Nice to see you.
Okay, I'm talking with Amelia, and we were just talking about, is it pronounced Avast? Avast, and you were telling me this great story about it took, was it 72 hours?
It was 2 weeks.
2 weeks, I'm sorry. Where did I get that?
72 hours would have been very impressive.
That was still very impressive. Well, tell us about the project.
Okay, so I went to grad school at the Center for Cartoon Studies up in White River Junction, Vermont. So it's a 2-year graduate program, and one of the assignments is known as either the Golden Age or the Silver Age project, where in the style of the 1930s and 40s, you get in a group of 6 to 8 people, and you have 2 weeks to write, draw, ink, color, and produce a full-color 32-page comic book. And then the year after I graduated, so in the summer of 2012, we did a rip-off of that where we had 3 months to do a 72-page full-color comic book. And that we actually wrote using a board game called Fiasco by Jason Morningstar. And so it's a very fun improv project, and it's kind of been described as like a Coen Brothers type dark comedy about these people in a small town in Vermont and like 72 hours of their day and what it's like to be up there. And we actually funded it through Kickstarter.
Cool. Well, now whose idea was it to do? I mean, this obviously looks like a pirate story. Did you all collaborate on the idea, or did somebody say, let's do a pirate story?
That would have been Jason Lutz. So there were 3 groups for ours. There was one that was like an educational kids comic style. There was a jungle kids comic style. And then Jason Lutz loves nautical things. And you can't see because this is all vocal, but I am wearing a full-on boat dress and like shark earrings. I also love nautical things. And Bill Bedard, who is also involved in this project, is a sailor. And so Jason was just dying to do a boat-themed thing. And so we knew as soon as we saw that up on the board that like we were going to be in it, and we were, and it was awesome. So.
Well, it's a very cool dress you got.
Oh, thank you. I got it on ModCloth. It was $30.
So what's the next project for you?
Well, I'm currently working on an ongoing project called Burn the Bridges of Arda. There are 2 books already out. There's a 3rd one that should be out next month. And that is in the same way that this current one that I'm talking about is a historical story. These take place in a fake 1920s New York City. And it's all about architecture and human sacrifice.
Wow.
So a little bit gothic.
I'll be looking for that. That sounds really cool.
Thank you.
Well, listen, thanks for talking with us, and I hope the rest of your SPX is a great experience.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for talking to me. No one's ever interviewed me before about comics, so it's been fun.
I'm sure I won't be the last.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I'm standing in front of a table with a lot of good stuff. This is Kilgore Books and Comics. We've been discussing a lot of Kilgore comics over the past several months. Someone we have not yet discussed is standing right in front of me, and that is Sam Spina. Sam, how is SPX going for you so far?
Yeah, it's going really good. I love SPX. It's so fun, and I'm so happy to be standing with Kilgore. They're such an awesome publisher, and yeah.
Now, you've got a debut title here this weekend, so would you like to tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, my new book is called Vulture City Stories. It's 7 short stories of an Arizona ghost town. It's really it's just like gag comic, really fun. There's like a twist halfway through. I feel like I did a good job. It's pretty funny.
Now, this is a follow-up to your first book that came out last year, I believe it was, Sheriff, correct?
Yeah, I made a book called Sheriff last year, which was, I mean, it still is, just a one-gag, like, one-joke comic. It's a 24-page comic that, like, if you flip through it, you kind of ruin the one joke. But there's, like, a huge setup, which is part of the joke, and I, like the setup so much that just to, like, kind of waste it on this one joke, I was like, I have to, like, explain this town a little more. I really like all the characters and stuff, so it's kind of just like another story. Like, this is 7 stories, it's just kind of like another story.
It's one that could have been included in Vulture City.
Yeah, absolutely.
So would you call this, for those who are unfamiliar with your work, an absurdist Western?
I would say it's an absurdist Western. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's so I grew up in Arizona, and I love Arizona. It's just like everyday life in a old Western town, like a ghost town, if people were, just how they lived then.
And the reason I use the word absurdist is actually based on that first story, that the first book that came out last year, is that the titular character, the sheriff, is a cactus.
Yeah, so there's a lot of little things throughout the book that kind of make you question, like, maybe this isn't just a regular old Western ghost town. And there's a twist, like, halfway through that.
And that's what you were talking about in this new one that comes out. So
yes.
that readers will have to pick up in order to find out what that twist is.
Yeah, it makes it a lot more... just describing it as, like, this old ghost town, it's kind of like a boring thing. But I assure you, it gets a little more interesting halfway through.
Now, I'm assuming you're going to go on to create more stories based on Vulture City.
Well, I recently got a job in animation. I work at Cartoon Network now, and
congratulations!
Yeah, thank you. And I pitched a show to Nickelodeon a couple years ago and stuff like that. So I really want to, like, put together a thing and maybe, like, pitch Vulture City Stories to, like, a studio sometime. But yeah, I'd love to make more comics with that. I think they're fun characters and stuff.
And the reason I asked that question, I just assumed that you would go on to create more Vulture City stories, is in both Vulture City and in Sheriff, the first pages, or the 2-page spread setting, where you point out where what is in the city. And so that suggests to me as a reader that you've got a lot invested in this, that this is not just a one-shot, in-and-out series of Vulture City-based stories.
Well, that was kind of the big gag behind Sheriff, was that there was this enormous, huge setup where I had this big town and I named every store and stuff like that, and then in the end it's just like one dumb joke. So I just felt like that added to it. But yeah, like I said, I just really liked that town. I liked the map that I drew and stuff. I was like, started thinking about who would live there, and so that did inspire this. And yeah, there's a ton of people that I could explore. There's a ton of different, like, jobs in the town that I would love to write about. It's a lot of funny stuff that could happen there.
Now, you were mentioning your work at Nickelodeon. Is this something that you would like to see in animation at some point?
Oh, yeah, totally. Not in Nickelodeon, though. Maybe, like, Adult Swim or...
Adult Swim, yeah, that's a better fit.
Yeah, I think so. It's pretty violent and, crass.
Especially when we see with that first issue.
Yeah, read the first... I actually put Sheriff on a free website if people want to read it. Hold on, let me get the link. It's a weird website. It's zcomics, zco.mx, / Sam Spina, / Sheriff. And you can go read Sheriff for free for a little taste. Yeah.
Okay. So they can get a taste of your work on that website, and then they can go to the Kilgore Books and Comics website to order the first issue or the second issue that's premiering this weekend at SPX.
I don't think Sheriff's in print anywhere anymore.
Anymore?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no more of those, but you can read it online.
Okay. Well, what do you plan beyond Vulture City Stories? I know that you got a new job at Nickelodeon, but do you have time for other projects?
Yeah, I mean, I love making comic books, and I have a ton of ideas, and Kilgore has a lot of big plans for the future that I would love to be a part of. So, yeah, I'm always working on new stuff. I have some new things mulling around in my head right now. But
well, I know that Dan and I are talking about maybe for next year at some point doing a publisher spotlight on Kilgore books. So your work will probably be a part of that.
I hope so. I hope I have a new book out by then. But yeah, it's hard to, give myself deadlines. But yeah, I hope so.
Well, Sam, thank you very much for taking the time and talking with the Comics Alternative.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm here with Keith Knight, and he has a very active table. Not only do you have his original art, but you have his various collections, and he has some of his strips posted up. And in fact, what I'm looking at right now, I would assume you created that right after Columbia?
Yeah, I did. It was interesting. It's the whole Dylan Roof incident at the church in South Carolina, and what happened was a week before, the kid who played Anakin Skywalker was arrested in South Carolina for driving 110 miles an hour. And so when that happened, and looking at Dylan Roof's terrible bowl haircut totally reminded me of those two, and so I just thought of that image and put Dylan Roof in the motif of Anakin Skywalker and the original Phantom Menace poster. And I was like, and then the shadow just came together with the KKK outfit. It was perfect. It was just like one of those, oh wow, it all came together.
Now, for our listeners, this is not a video podcast, so what you're describing is this just one panel strip of the young Skywalker who's standing in, he has a gun and he has a Confederate flag, and then the shadow behind him is not Vader, or it's a Vader-like figure with a hood.
Yes, a hood, yeah.
Now, what kind of reaction did you get from that?
Oh, it was one of those, it was a great reaction, like, holy cow, this is, an amazing strip. I think some people now come by and go, so is that Luke Skywalker? They're sort of confused. But most of the people who are somewhat aware of current events will know what that is,
Well, any controversy surrounding that? Did you get a lot of negative reactions?
No.
Like Star Wars fans getting on their high horse?
No, not at all. Never.
And the reason I ask that is because you're no stranger for controversy when it comes to a lot of your strips. And do you kind of thrive on that?
Well, no. It hasn't happened in a while. I think, the world is kind of caught up to my strips. I've been doing police brutality strips for 20 years. And that's what my latest collection is. And I think now that everyone has a cell phone, people are like, oh, yeah, so that is happening all the time and has been going on forever. So nothing has ruffled feathers in a while for me. So it's been a while.
Now, for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with your work, you have, there's the Think strip, and then there's the K Chronicles.
Yeah, I do. The K Chronicles I've been doing for 20 plus years. It's my autobiographical multi-panel strip, runs in alternative weeklies. And then there's a spin-off of that, which is the Daily Nightlife. The Nightlife runs in the Washington Post and places like that. It's a daily syndicated strip. And then there's Think, my single-panel political strip that I've been doing since about 1999. And that's my single-panel political stuff.
And for our listeners to go and find your work, maybe as they're listening to this podcast interview now, what's the URLs?
Two best places is the two best places are kchronicles.com, KCHRONICLES.com. And then also my Patreon page. If you go to look me up, Keith Knight, KNIGHT, and Patreon, you check out my Patreon page, you can subscribe, become a patron, and you can get I send all my stuff to you via email, and it's a great way to catch up on me. My podcast will be up on my Patreon page, and this podcast, and different things like that. So it's a good way to catch up on everything that I'm doing.
Well, that'd be great. Now, you have a variety of collections here. You say your latest is They Shoot Black People, Don't They? 20 years of police brutality cartoons. And so this goes back all the way from the beginning.
Yeah, I don't think any Rodney King stuff is in there, but it really, Rodney King was the start of the modern era of police brutality, and then sort of goes through people like Abner Louima, who was assaulted by New York police with a plunger, and then the guy who shot 41 shots in New York, which I'm totally spacing on his name right now, but then all the way through up until, really straight up until the Dylan Roof shooting. And it's a depressing collection, but it also gives you some idea of how much this goes on and some perspective, and it also gives you some points on what you can do to help stop it.
And then you have your other collections as well. Night Takes Queen, Are We Feeling Safer Yet? How many collections total do you have out?
Oh, geez, wow. Well, I don't know if they're all in print, but there's probably about 15. So there's a lot.
You can find them through your website, Amazon.
Yeah. Through my website is, I get more money if you go through my website. But if you want, you can find it all over the place. I don't carry the complete K Chronicles, which is not really complete because it's 500 pages. It's way too heavy to mail and keep in my house. So you can order that from Amazon.
Well, Keith, I thank you very much for taking the time and talking with the Comics Alternative. I hope you enjoy the rest of SPX.
I'm having a great time. I always have a great time. This is the best small press event in America.
I'm here with Gregory Benton, and Gregory Benton is no stranger to the Comics Alternative, or should be no stranger to listeners, because we discussed a new work of his, Smoke, a few months ago, along with Dean Haspiel's Beef with Tomato. Now I'm standing in front of him at SPX. Gregory, how are things this weekend?
It's been a very fun weekend. I'm happy to be back at SPX this year.
Now, even though Gene and I discussed Smoke, Beef with Tomato, and Schmuck, the official release, and that was about 2 months ago, maybe a month and a half ago, the official release is not really until this weekend, correct?
Yeah, this is the debut of all three of the books from Hang Dai. Beef with Tomato, Smoke, and Schmuck, all debuts for SPX.
Yes. And so we jumped the gun, but you guys wanted us to jump the gun.
Oh, we were very appreciative. It really helped boost the pre-sales, helped get some interest out there. Thank you.
I'm curious. Have you heard anyone say, hey, I listened to that podcast and I found out about Smoke?
Yeah, it happens all the time. Really, it's nice. It's people come up and
so. Because you're not being ironic?
No, not at all. No, people will say, hey, I listened to this podcast and heard the great reviews and wanted to say hi and picking up the book, and thank you.
Well, that's great. Yeah. And, I was joking with you earlier before we started to record that, please forgive me for not bringing B+F with me on the plane for you to sign. I mean, that is a really big thing. And maybe I can take your picture for the show notes after this and have a picture of you beside the book just to show our listeners how big that actually is. Now, Smoke is noticeably more contained. Did you not want to go the large format route again? I mean, it's still a decent-sized book.
It's kind of funny. It's not about the dimensions of the book necessarily. I think what it was I like to work close to 100% size. I think sometimes comics, they've done it at, let's say, 10 by 15, a standard comics page. It's reduced 64% to become your 8 by 5 comic book floppy. I like working almost at 100%. I like the mark that you see to be the mark that I made. So I was just working on a square, a 7 by 7 square, essentially. And so the book came out to be a 7 by 7 square, because that was the size of the art that I was doing. B&F, that was a book that, like you say, it is way too large. It's oversized. But I have to blame Chris Pitzer at Ad House for that one, because I had done a version of it for a very short version for Mocha Fest in 2013 that won the Mocha Award, and that was just intended to be like a floppy. And Chris said, "Hey, let's make this into a larger book." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I'd like it to be this big." And he said, "Okay, done." And then so now then you're saddled with this enormous book that you can't shelve. I had to knock out shelves in my bookcase just to house it.
Did you think that he would agree to the size?
No, not really. I didn't, to be honest. But there is, like in Europe, there's a size for there's a not a tradition exactly, but there are books that size, definitely. But it's still it's definitely a pain to deal with.
Yeah, I still have a hard time finding a place where to put it, in my study. Not on a bookshelf.
But, when it gets cold in winter and you need some extra firewood, you can those pages burn for about 6 or 7 hours each.
Now one of the differences, and we discussed this a little bit on the show, one of the differences between B plus F and by the way, do you pronounce it B plus F, B and F?
It's fluid. It's whatever you say.
Okay. Really. Okay, so one of the differences between B plus F and Smoke, both are very dreamlike in the way that the story, as it is, unfolds. But with B plus F, there seems to be more fuzziness around the edges as opposed to, let's say, Smoke, which seems to have a clearer storyline. Am I reading that correctly? Or am I just missing the story in B? There is a story in B plus F, but it seems more vague and, I keep coming to the word dream, almost dreamlike, surreal, than Smoke. In Smoke, there are movements from what seems to be going on in reality into almost a fantasy-like world, almost another dimension that is dreamlike in nature, but it's not surreal in the same way that B plus F is.
Yeah, no, I think it's definite. It's not. I wouldn't say it's a deliberate thing, but B plus F was absolutely a stream of consciousness book. I started with the first page and I worked until the 64th page. Not really. I started when I had to make it a longer book from the initial 20-page booklet that came out. Then I planned 3 pages at a time, but I wasn't planning. I kind of had an idea of where I wanted it to be at the end of the book, at the end of the 64 pages. But that really was a meandering journey of stream of consciousness, surreal. I'd write into corners and get the characters out of those corners. But Smoke was definitely. Now the thing with Smoke was I wrote it in 2 parts. There is kind of like a underworld surrealist part of it that has that Jolo dog in it, the skeleton dog, and then there's the kind of what you might consider the earth part of the book where the kids are working on the farm. Right. So I did both of those independently, and then the task for me after doing both independently was folding them together into a book where it kind of weaves back and forth between the 2 stories. So I was trying to be a little bit playful for myself to get that done. But so Smoke was definitely written in 2 parts, and those parts were deliberately done. So there wasn't. While it was still, I was still allowing my mind to play with the story, you're right. It's definitely not as surreal as B plus F.
Yeah. And also another difference, you mentioned the kid workers, is there seems to be much more of a social awareness in Smoke in ways that you don't have in B plus F. The way that children are used in terms of labor and the dangers they're in.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to say anything about the social aspect of that, of using underage workers in farms. But
what had no message?
No, there was a little bit of a message, but the message was like how maybe my message is, who protects the children who have no protection. You, as a child, you're relying on adults to do what's best for you, and they don't always have your interests at heart. And I think that's a lesson that transcends just this book. It just happens that I had been reading about these kids working in farms and getting sick, and I kind of felt that's the quintessential story. That's like the worst situation where you have to work and nobody's really looking out for you. So I think that's the message more than anything else. Who protects the interests of the children? Vulnerable children have been throughout all of my work. My first large book came out from slave labor graphics in '96. It was called Hummingbird. And that's all about a little girl whose mother basically leaves her, and she has to call her estranged father to come get her. And she lives in New York, he's in California, and that whole thing. And he has no interest in her. So it's kind of like who's caring for the kids, I guess, is what it is. Yeah.
So that may be a theme woven throughout many of your narratives.
I think it's probably a very personal narrative in my life. So yeah, it kind of comes through when I'm dreaming or thinking up stories, I think that's where that's definitely.
And it's even there in B+F.
Yeah, I guess it is too. Yeah, for sure. She's a little bit older, but I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. That's something that's I guess it's just in me. I guess it's therapy, right? Comics are therapy, so that's what's coming out. Yeah.
So if you're debuting the books here, and if our listeners want to get a copy of Smoke, which they should, then where would be the best place to do so? Through the Hang Die Edition website?
No, you can get it through your local bookstore. You can also order it through your usual. I would encourage people to, if their local bookstore doesn't have it, to try to get it through them to support the local bookstores. At the very least, you can get it on Amazon. We don't sell it through the Hang Die website.
You don't?
No, we do not. But you probably could also get it through the Alternative Comics website. Wow, cool. But I would try your local bookstore first, because I think they need. I have friends who ordered Smoke through their bookstore, and sadly those bookstores are closing. I hope it has nothing to do with my book. But I want people to try to keep working with their local people.
Well, Gregory, thank you very much for taking the time and talking with me for the podcast.
I appreciate it, Derek. Thanks
again, because you spoke earlier when we did the Hang Die Edition show.
Yeah, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We can call this the Hang Die Edition portion of the interview show at SPX, because I was previously talking with Gregory Benton. Now I'm talking with a colleague of his at Hang Die Editions, Dean Haspiel. Dean, welcome back on the podcast, because we talked to you a couple of months ago when we did the Publisher Spotlight.
Yes, and then that was a great spotlight. I thank you for doing that. We're here at SPX and having a blast, as the only way you should,
Yeah, so you were telling me off mic you had a wild time last night at the party?
Listen, there's the prom. I'm 48 years old. I actually never even went to my own prom, and I've always missed that. I remember last year when they brought that up, I was like, that's bizarre. Let me go check this out. And I wound up dancing, with the kids. I've been coming to SPX since 1996. And when I went, and that was his third year, I think, back then when I arrived. Chris Orr was then organizing it, and I remember it was like a one-day show Saturday, and then Sunday they did a roast pig, a barbecue pig, and a baseball game, or softball game. And I remember really enjoying that. It was kind of like a way to you have comics one day and community the next day. I mean, it's all community anyway. But I really love that aspect of it. And now it's transitioned to having there's a chocolate fountain and, cakes and it got a little fancy and that's really cool. And then there's the prom dance now, which was a lot of fun. Or like a cocktail mingle, And obviously there's the Ignatz Awards. I remember sitting in Chris Orr's office when I would crash his house and talking to him and Ed Brubaker about the idea of this show could use an award. And it would bring more people to the show, and that we were sitting there and co-invented the idea of the Ignatz. And I think it was Ed Brubaker who actually named it the Ignatz. And I think he's always been silent about that because it was a quiet little thing that happened. So that was really exciting. And other people, of course, were involved in that. And it's a great show because for me, I came here I've always wanted to write and draw for Marvel and DC Comics, and I've had those small opportunities and working for Archie on the Fox. But this is the place where you kind of you beta test your own creations and see how people respond. And it's not necessarily tied to a franchise or a movie or a T-shirt. And back then, I remember like a lot of people do on a Friday night, the night before the show, you're Xeroxing and folding and stapling your comics. But comics have gotten sexier since then. I mean, I don't know if you noticed when you're walking around the room, they're beautiful objects. So I really love this show because. And again, it's also what I call a kiddie show. It's for the kids. It's for the newbies to come. And so at age 48, I kind of wonder what my place is here. But because I'm still doing creator-owned comics, I feel that that's what justifies my presence. And you get to see some of the old-timers, and we look back and, we're like, oh my God, remember when it was a third of the size and we were playing softball and eating roast pig, and stuff like that. But I don't know. I really love it. I love to dabble. I love to see the new myself. I'm looking at what are people making and what kind of stories are they telling and what are people interested in. So that just helps me as a creator to be at a show like this.
Now, when you came out of here originally, I'm assuming you had copies of, let's say, Keyhole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I first came here, oops, my phone's ringing. Sorry, let me just turn that off. God, what did I have? I must have had Keyhole comics with Josh Neufeld, and back then it might have even been a mini comic before it became published by Millennium Publications that then we created an imprint for called Modern Comics. But yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I would like to know what I walked in the door at SPX in 1996 with, and what was on my table. I do remember sitting next to two guys, a guy named Chris Staros and a guy named Brett Warnock. And I think Brett had just published some kind of little, maybe a top shelf anthology or some kind of, I didn't know it was called Top Shelf then. And Chris Staros had the Staros Report, which was a really cool comic. And I remember watching them broker a meeting, like, we should get in publishing together. And sitting next to those guys and cheering, a toast to this new thing called Top Shelf Comics, which, of course, has gone on to blow up and publish so many great works, including Jennifer Hayden's The Story of My Tits, which is like one of the big hits of the show here in 2015. But yeah, no, it's a long, rich history of independent comics publishing and independent, comics creators, and it's lovely.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your most recent work, which was just released this week, and that is Beef with Tomato.
Yes.
So, for those who aren't aware of this book, well, first and foremost, shame on them, because they should have listened to our Spotlight on Hang Die Editions a couple of months ago. But how would you introduce this to listeners who still are not familiar with this?
Well, Beef with Tomato, the way I've been describing it, is it's my escape from Manhattan to Brooklyn. And it takes place, probably the earliest story in the book chronologically is probably 1997 when I did move to Brooklyn. And it was because of a breakup, a heartbreak. And it was my girlfriend's apartment that I was living with in Alphabet City in Manhattan. And so I had to find a place. And I kind of tell this one little story that happened directly before I had to move, which is about a guy named Awful George, who was this bizarre shut-in that hosted like 1,000 cats, and then he had disappeared, and the cats had gone tribal and started eating each other. And then there was a really bad smell in these apartments, and like the neighbors called the cops, and the cops came, and when they opened the door, the apartments were piled up to 6-foot high garbage, and cats rampant and running everywhere, and like it was awful. And that's why they called him Awful George. And then finally they found one of the causes of the smell was Awful George's dead mother that he had rolled up in a rug. She had passed away, but he hadn't done anything with her body. He kept her because he kept everything. It's like, was that Collier's disease or Collier's syndrome? Where you covet and keep everything.
That would be like a very dark episode of Hoarders.
Oh, yes. It was a dark episode of what would later become Hoarders, right? So that's the first story that introduces my character that represents me in this kind of semi-autobiographical graphic novel. And then I moved to Brooklyn, and before I actually ever moved to Brooklyn, I would go visit friends who lived in Brooklyn, and I always equated it, as a city boy, I equated Brooklyn as like going to the country. And, because in Manhattan, there's all the tall buildings and the white noise and chatter, and so the first time I moved and actually lived in Brooklyn, and I remember the first week, the silence was so loud. It was louder than police sirens and car accidents and people screaming, bloody murder and all that stuff that I was used to, that I could fall asleep to. And now I'd be laying in my bed hearing silence, and then I could hear like someone's footsteps outside, like 2 floors below, walking on the sidewalk. And it kind of freaked me out, and it made all those horror films that take place in the woods make much more sense to me. But then I adapted to that, and I really loved Brooklyn for its neighbors and its neighborhoods. Something that I felt was starting to be monopolized by business in the city, that was disappearing. So I was regaining that sensibility back in Brooklyn, and I think we still have that in Brooklyn, like these great neighborhoods where the neighbors know each other, kind of like whenever I visit the Catskills, like everyone knows each other, you have to.
Yeah. So now, Beef with Tomato, you say that it's a collection of autobiographical, shorter pieces.
Yes.
But this is not your first outing in that kind of writing, because this is a follow-up to a previous work.
So I did when I was doing Keyhole, which you mentioned, one of the things I did in Keyhole was to tell autobio stories. Mm-hmm. So I did some of those, and then I would do autobio stories in other anthologies. And finally, I collected those as a 48-page one-shot published in conjunction with Alternative Comics and Top Shelf. It was called Opposable Thumbs. And so we came out with that book, and that actually got me recognized by the Eisners as, promising new talent type thing, And then because of that, it got editors at Marvel and DC to kind of take a look at me. So it was actually a really good thing to publish that. Kids, if you're listening out there, it's always good to publish and show up to your own party. Anyway, so Opposable Thumbs is like a collection of my favorite kind of autobio stories that wasn't like pieced together in any kind of cohesive way. It was more sporadic stories. So when I did the stories that appear in Beef with Tomato, that was what I did for a series called Street Code through Zuda, which was DC Comics' webcomics initiative. And I did that for about a year and a half. And then, they held on to the rights for that for about 5 years. And I knew it one day I did want to put it in print and publish it, once I got the rights back. So that's what the bulk of the material of Beef with Tomato is. And there is kind of a through line to it. And since then, I've also done like other little 1 and 2 pagers. I added that to the collection, plus prose. I added prose pieces because one of the things I like to do now is actually write more. And even though comics essentially is graphic writing, in a lot of ways, the cartooning is writing, especially narrative cartooning. I've been going to like retreats and artist residencies, and I've gotten in for writing, and I've dabbled more with prose and long form and, essays and whatnot, and I still, write about my life once in a while. So I wanted to add that to the collection, kind of as a transitional thing, to show that, maybe one of the things I will be doing in the future is writing more. Maybe I've also been writing a novel. I've written a couple screenplays. I've got a TV pilot that I co-wrote with editor-author Jonathan Benkin, who formerly of DC Vertigo, that we're pitching right now. That's, maybe that'll go someplace. Who knows? Maybe that'll be my doorway into California. I don't know.
Get you out to California.
Yeah.
So do you plan on doing more of the comics, not so much prose, but in addition to that,
right,
the shorter autobiographical pieces, maybe for a third collection, like Opposable Thumbs and Beef with Tomato?
That's a good question because I love superhero comics. So what was happening is for a while there, drawing Harvey Picard's life stories through American Splendor and The Quitter, working with Jonathan Ames on The Alcoholic, working with my friend Inverno Lopez on Cuba My Revolution, dabbling in my own autobio, I started to have a little allergic reaction to that as well because, I do love superheroes. I love the hyperbole and the abstraction and expression of genre comics, where, a man can fly or robot dolphins can have sex in outer space, whatever it is, that isn't plausible in a memoir unless they're tripping out, and I don't want to always be defaulting to someone doing drugs so I can draw that stuff, But if there's a good reaction to this, and so far there has been, it's encouraging. And I do have lots of stories. Like I said, I've been writing, prose, but I do think visually. So it's possible that I could either adapt some of that prose and or write proper a comic script for more memoir. And I think if I did that, it would probably have to be a done-in-one graphic novel-sized story, I think, because I feel like that's how people respond even more to these types of things. I'm not sure exactly what that story would be or about, and that's the kind of thing where you have to live life to then be able to look back at it and see what you were doing and then isolate a story from that. So I have to give it a little bit of time.
Okay. Now, how are things going with the Fox?
Things are going great. There was a lot of great response for the 2 miniseries I did that were 5 issues each, total of 10. It's now on hiatus because Archie's Dark Circle line is rolling out these other characters to see if these do well. So I think they're just doing they're being really cautious. And they're saying, all right, we're going to come out with more Black Hood because they had a commitment of 12 issues. But then they have the new S.H.I.E.L.D. series, and after that's going to be the Web. And I think they're just waiting to see how readers respond. Not for nothing, but they're an independent publisher as well, They don't have a lot of capital, believe it or not, like a Warner Brothers or a Disney who underwrites DC Comics and Marvel Comics nowadays,
Yeah. And for listeners, it may sound a little strange that, Archie doing superhero type comics, historically they did in the past,
yes,
but this is still kind of tentative ground for them in terms of getting back into it. So I can understand the caution.
It's a caution. They loved what I did. Again, the people who actually read the comics loved what I did. But I think it's a case of there's a deluge. You go to the, Wednesday comic book buyers, every week is like another 100 superhero comics. How do you compete with that? And with so many great like superhero movies coming out, maybe that's part of what's helping, perpetuate these legacy characters. And Archie hasn't done that throughout the years. I mean, they created a lot of these characters in 1940, okay? The Shield came out before Captain America, things like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough nut to crack when there's too many superheroes. Again, if you read the actual Dark Circle characters, they're great stories. They're well done, but it's like people still want like that fifth. There are like 5 Spider-Man comic books coming out a month, or 12 X-Men, or whatever the hell it is. It's hard to your wallet will crack. That's the tough nut to crack. So anyway.
What kind of reaction did you get last year from Fear My Dear?
I got a lot of great reactions.
Yeah. I love that. That was one of my favorite fun comics from last year.
That's my baby. That's one of my babies. That's Billy Dogman is a character. If I had to pick who my superhero is, he's a love titan, And I know that sounds silly, but so Fear My Dear is one of my favorite stories that I've done, and it was well received. Again, it's a hard kind of like, well, where do you place that? Like where does that belong on the rack? It's a romance comic. It's kind of a surreal, psychedelic, superhero comic.
And a humor comic. It's funny as hell.
It's dark, but it's funny. It's intended to be funny. You're supposed to laugh at it, with it. And, I don't know. It's like, how do you market David Lynch, or P.T. Anderson? Like, have you watched any of the recent P.T. Anderson movies, like The Master or Inherent Vice?
No.
They're like, you don't know what you're watching. I don't know what it is, But it's ambient and it's beautiful. It's kind of like you watch Mad Men.
Yes. Oh, yes.
All right, so you watch an episode of Mad Men, and after about an hour, you're like, I don't know what I just watched. But it's great. And it's really cool. And they don't always have, like, that the easy places how to slot that show or how to slot certain things. So for me, as much as I enjoy doing, like, the superhero stuff that people are, the known quantities, I like to dabble in experimental kind of comic book theater, if that makes sense. The avant-garde, like Louis C.K.
Yeah.
Like, he's doing avant-garde films. And I think the more that there's an audience for that, the more an SPX will become mainstream. To bring it back to SPX, SPX is still considered alternative and a way to test the waters for the newbies. But at some point, this will be our mainstream,
Well, a lot to think about.
Yeah, man.
And I'm glad that you brought it back to where we began, and that is SPX. So I'll let you get back to your table. Dean, I want to thank you very much for talking with the Comics Alternative once again.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
And once again, Derek, just a great bunch of folks to talk with, and that was a lot of fun.
It was. Some of our conversations were longer, some of them were shorter. Some we did in the actual hall itself, and so the sound quality, we're kind of talking loud over the ambient noise. And then sometimes we were able to talk to a few creators, such as Gregory Benton and Dean Haspiel, in a corner off to the side, so you don't have as much noise you're trying to speak over. So, regardless of where we talked to them, we had great conversations with everyone. So we want to thank all these people who took the time from their tables and spoke with us for the Comics Alternative.
Yes, we are very appreciative, and we really did have a good time talking with everyone.
Exactly. And these guys have a lot of comics that are out or that will be coming out soon, and if you want to pre-order their comics, you can't pick a better place to do so than the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. So go to dcbservice.com, and you're going to find some great specials. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to get in touch with us and let us know what you think about the various interviews we conducted at Small Press Expo. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll see on the right-hand side of your browser a tab that says Send Voicemail. Click on that, and from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile device, you can record a voice message through the wonders of SpeakPipe. It's very simple and easy to use. Or if you're someone who likes to do it difficultly, then give us a call. Our phone number is 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And if you want to get the jump on everybody else about what's going on at the Comics Alternative, as well as far as the podcast and the blog, you can follow us on Twitter. We are at the number 2 guys with PhDs. You will get all of the updates there, and we certainly appreciate all of those who continue to retweet our tweets.
That's right. We also appreciate emails. If you want to contact the show, you can send an email to 2guys@comicsalternative.com. You can contact me directly at derek@comicsalternative.com. And Andy?
You can reach me at wolverton@comicsalternative.com.
You can also find us on social media such as Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, and Pinterest. We even have a YouTube channel, so you can check out the show that way. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes, you can stream us on Stitcher, and you can also find us on TuneIn. And you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as our reviews and our comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And that's on the website, comicsalternative.com.
That's right. We are just about everywhere that you would want to be.
Yes, and even some places you don't want us to be.
Yeah, maybe so.
Yes. So we're not done yet, guys. We have one more on-location interview show, which will be going up tomorrow, and we have a lot more conversation that we want you to hear. So be sure to return for that one. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy.
We'll talk to you later.